Business success depends on several factors: the current economic climate, your pricing or your sales strategy. But at its heart, your team is the backbone of your business and is essential for staying competitive in today's fast-paced market. But just how much of an impact can a motivated, high-performing team give you? The answer, I believe, lies in the numbers. According to a survey carried out by the Economist Intelligence Unit, poor teamwork can result in sales lost up to $1 million. According to a recent study, engaged employees outperform low-performing teams by more than 200%, and a Gallup study showed businesses with the highest levels of employee engagement had 21% higher levels of profitability. So why shouldn't you be investing in improving your team's performance? And how do we do that? That's what we'll be exploring with our guest, Margie Olsen. Margie, you're an executive coach and leadership team development expert. You're the founder of Olsen Consulting. You have a doctorate, I believe, in organizational development. And
that's correct.
Deliver coaching with practical strategies and actions for leaders and leadership teams to build the right foundation for teamwork and productivity. Your clients have span across various industries from aeronautics, financial services, fintech, healthcare, non-profits, retail, etc. But perhaps more interestingly, you've developed top Team Accelerator to help businesses develop their senior leaders and leadership teams, and in particular build systems and habits for successful change and sustained improvements going forward, which I'd love to explore. I'm curious though, Margie, was there a particular incident or event that triggered this journey into developing high-performing teams?
There was. So you mentioned my doctorate. I did my doctoral program later in life. And so it was about 10, 15 years ago. And we were in our coursework, 4 years of coursework to understand organizations, leadership, teams. And once I was done with the 4 years of coursework, I knew that we had known everything we need to know about how to have a high-performing team. At that point, it was 30 years. It's now 40 years. And so it was my what the heck dissertation topic. Why? And I had already been in organizations for decades, and I experienced organizations struggling with teams, leaders struggling with leadership, and struggling with growing teams and developing teams and having high-performing teams. And yet we knew what we needed to know to make that happen. So then I embarked on a journey to understand it, because it wasn't obvious to me. There wasn't an obvious reason why. And in almost every organization I had been in, there were major challenges that you could tie directly back to what is happening with communication, with being able to be on the same page, with having teams row in the same direction. So I did my dissertation on that topic and spent years researching it. And really it boils down to, this is not rocket science. This is not something you haven't heard. If I say to a client, well, I think you should really do this, they'll say, well, I've heard of that. We've tried that. But what they haven't done is pull it all together and focus on effective implementation with the things that we know about how we talk to each other, how we learn, how we behave, and how we make changes. So as soon as and also certain leadership roles, a person can get promoted to have a wonderful leadership role, but that doesn't mean they know how to be a leader of a team. They are an expert in their field. They might even be a savant. They might be someone who's running the entire company because of how great experience they have and that they're admired in their field. And they may not know the 27 things that are critical to have systems in place to be a high-performing leader and to lead a high-performing leadership team. So I was very interested in how to help people make that happen.
Brilliant. And I'm also curious, given your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
So I am a cut to the chase type person. And I didn't necessarily know this about myself, but it gets described. So if I'm with a group of people, somebody will introduce me or say, oh yeah, and Margie, she is laser-like focused. And so one of the benefits I've been able to do with my combination of natural interests, passion, talents, education, and then a lot of experience in organizations is you can get really mired or distracted by dozens, hundreds of different ideas, theories, opportunities for what we can do to make it better. And the truth is, there are some critical few that if you do those, you get a lot of other benefits from it. And so I love efficiency. I love doing the shortest distance with the least amount of effort to get the biggest outcome. And that's helpful for leaders because they have that 150 things on their plate every single day. And it's overwhelming. My clients tell me that it's overwhelming to think, should I go in this direction or should I go in that direction? And for whatever reason, the way I think, I'm able to immediately prioritize and distill down to the most important. And then we use our tools, how we learn, how we develop habits, how we observation and changing as you go to apply it so that you're not going to be perfect at the outset, but then how do you make it stick in the future? And that's something that's I'm really passionate about.
I know you've talked about this in the answer that you just gave, but I'm curious, other than this idea of focus and being really clear about what needs to be done or achieved, what would you say from in your area of strength is something that businesses don't know but should?
For whatever reason, I have a lot of information that they don't have because it may have come across their desk at some point, or their computer, or their podcast, or on the golf course, but they're not able to make it comprehensive. I like to remind clients that our very first leader was the adult that was raising us, and our very first team is the group of people, whoever is in the household as we are being raised. And then our very first intentional team. So, for example, I'm thinking about who I am as a person and how I fit with a team and what a team is like. Usually the first place that happens is in sports or music or a first job. And then we come to organizations from there with that combination. So we have our family background, we have that first team, and then we have the initial first forays out into sports or first jobs or whatever. And in many cases, that is not the ideal team. That is not the ideal leader, and that is not the ideal team. And I think a lot of my clients they don't realize that they're leading, and they're leading their team in all of those really old messages and old ways of thinking and working, which may or may not have been helpful to them. And so they have to unlearn what the systems they came up in and learn new ways of behaving and interacting, and then apply new systems to have it become a part of the future. And one of my passions and one of my strengths is I'm always in favor of development. And so I've heard people, family and friends have made this joke about me. Margie's always developing, and she's always interested in someone else's development. So that's just one of my geniuses. That's just it's in my genes, is whatever it is, we can do it better. And the other thing is, so as a child, we moved a lot. I graduated from high school at age 17. We'd already moved 22 times. So I was an expert on just a lot of chaos and a lot of change. And so I had to try to figure out, how is there a way to do this in a way that's helpful? And I watched decisions being made with the leaders and the teams in my household and then around me that were actually not that helpful. And so I have always wanted everyone to feel like work is a place for them where they can make their life better. And so most people go to work, and how can we make work a better place? It's one of the most amazing, honoring roles of a leader is they really can. If you have a company of 10,000 people, you're impacting 50,000 and more, just because of the exponential aspect that every person comes to work and they are being impacted positively or negatively by how the day goes or how the evening goes. And so a leader, it's sacred to be able to impact people's lives. And so I wanted people to have it go well. I don't need, and I knew this intuitively, I don't need people sitting around at work saying, I'm happy. I don't think that's a metric we're looking for. I think what we're looking for is productivity. And we know that internal drive, we're all hardwired for this. Internal drive is for growth, and internal satisfaction comes from doing something well. And so if I'm a leader, then my role is to help the people in my purview be very clear about what it is that we're doing, have a complete understanding about what their role is in that, know for sure that they have what they need to be able to do what we're asking them to do, and then check in with them and let them know how we think they're doing. With those pieces in place, productivity shoots up, self-satisfaction shoots up. People don't even realize that they themselves, their life immediately improves because they are leaning forward. Things make sense. And a lot of what I just described, when you don't have those in place, creates many of the problems that my clients have today. You can do the root cause analysis and go all the way back to people are missing role clarity. Now, they didn't realize that because there's 100 things to be thinking about every day, but role clarity rises to the top. So to me, I'm passionate about development, and let's develop those pieces that are the where we get the biggest outcome for the time and effort.
Certainly. I'd like to start with the notion of leaders that you were talking about, and perhaps some people listening to this would have recognized that at times, or perhaps many times, people are often promoted on the basis of their performance or technical abilities,
Correct.
not necessarily on the basis of any leadership qualities per se. So, what you were describing, I would think, would require a major shift in thinking and perhaps a heart shift as well. I'm curious, how do you help people navigate that transition?
One of the things that I learned along the way once I started coaching was what the coaching process really can do, and how the way that I was experiencing it didn't seem to have enough outcomes or enough change. And I realized along the way it's because we were focusing on a piece. I was coming with a client and meeting once a week, and we were focusing on the thing that's on their radar today, or the fire that came up this past week, or they have a goal. So they want to meet a goal. But if they really peel back the layer of the onions and do the 5 whys, why, then why, they find out that all of these different challenges that they have and the things that they want to fix and the reason they would even hire a coach, they boil down to some fundamental pieces that once you get those building blocks in place, you will start to immediately resolve. You can just lob off half of your fires that you have by putting the right systems in place. And so what I noticed with coaching is I'm trained to develop leaders in a classroom, give them textbooks, role play, have scenarios where they read a case study and then they walk through the process. What would you do? And somehow along the way, with my experience, my education, and my natural abilities, I figured out that the best way to learn for all of us is with a purpose. And that also ties to that internal satisfaction. So I began to immediately change my coaching, and I built my entire program on all the work that we do is based on the actual work that they're involved in at the time. And what happens when you start to put these building blocks in place and you start to talk out loud about behaviors that are helpful and behaviors that are not helpful, and you start to be open and honest about the real challenges, the development is happening as we speak. That's how they develop. Now, there is a level of emotional intelligence. There is self-awareness. And so there are clients that I don't work with, or that we put it off and we delay it, or we'll start working together and we'll realize that this is not a good fit because they need so much development in that area that I wouldn't be the first place to do that. But once someone has at least they're aware of what self-awareness is, they have an understanding of the benefit of it, they are willing to take on the challenge, the work. And then everything we do when I coach with clients and everything we do in my program is about the work. And so go into the future 8, 10, 12 weeks And all of a sudden, meetings that have been the dread of everyone in the organization, except a couple people that maybe do most of the talking or appreciate being able to relax and not have to talk, meetings become a thing that people look forward to. And when you start to execute on meetings that are high performing, you are learning in the process how to lead and how to be a team. And then we walk through, whenever I'm coaching, we walk through all of those behaviors that are the ones that you need and the ones that are getting in the way. And there are very specific, very concrete coaching methods, assessments and activities and planning that help people grow self-awareness. We know how to do that. We know how to grow self-awareness. We know how to increase our emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman and the people that have been working on that's decades ago. But you have to build it in to the work that you're already doing. You're already fighting fires. You're already having meetings all day and you're not even liking them, let alone loving them. So we start to make the transition. We start to make the adjustment. But once we begin to do the actual work, the development as a leader grows. And that's good because leaders, so they had their original person raising them, their original leader, their original team. And then what happens over the arc of someone's career, even when they get to be promoted because of their technical knowledge or their sales or the companies that they built and sold and built some more, their own experience with leaders and teams is all they have to go on for how to do it. And most of my clients have no idea how to do that. Most of my clients couldn't even tell me a list of 10 items, 10 indicators of a high performing team. They can tell me 10 reasons why their team is low or 10 ways that it shows up that their team is low performing. They know they can articulate the pain, especially if I ask them some questions. It's okay to be honest. It's okay to talk about this openly. If we do that, they can talk about the pain. They're not sure they have no idea that it's possible to have it be better because that's not been in their view. So they only have what's in their view. So now we're introducing them to the behaviors that are the most important and how do you get there and growing self-awareness. And then I've developed team awareness. And so a team together knows things and grows their self-awareness and their emotional intelligence together. They're in it together and they're learning from each other. And once those building blocks start getting in place, there is growth happening naturally. And then I'm a coach. So we keep the coaching up and we do team coaching and I do observations and we spend several months together. And through all of that, there's all kinds of opportunities for checking in and reinforcing when it's going well and pausing when there is something that is a stubborn challenge that's not going away. Let's do a little deep dive and go deeper down. So I have experience going to therapy. I've done therapy in my life and I've seen the benefit of that. And it reminds me, so therapy, I think some of the theories and some of the ways that a therapist will conduct therapy it's based on the learning process. It's not enough for me to desire a different future. It's not enough for me to want to give up a habit that's not helping me. I need to follow the learning process. And I help leaders and their teams follow a learning process to actually grow that self-awareness, that emotional intelligence, and the actual what to do as a leader, how to prioritize, how to encourage clarity and alignment, how to hold people accountable and how to help them hold each other accountable and how to have the right operations in place. So they just continue to add to their toolkit about how to be a leader while they're leading and doing their work.
Certainly, that sounds really interesting in that they're gaining the experience, they're learning by doing, in a manner of speaking. I'm curious though, with the kind of experience that you want to create for your clients, even through learning, are there certain metrics that help guide the overall outcome of what needs to be achieved? If so, could you talk us through how you come up with these metrics, or is it the same for everyone? etc.?
No. So the first thing we do around metrics, so I have 4 pillars in the program. It's called Top Team Accelerator. The first pillar is, so the very first thing that we do is teamwork. And that is really developing as a team. And with each one of the pillars, there is a knowledge transfer. So I am educating them on all the pieces that they're going to need to be successful in that particular pillar. And then we go do an offsite, and the leader leads an offsite where we're actually making decisions about how to apply this and how to grow it in the organization and which metrics we're going to use to monitor it. And so I have some recommendations, but we always start with, what are you already using? If whatever I'm doing, again, in the eyes of efficiency, whatever you're already doing, the path you're already taking, anytime we can use that path is the most effective. Mm-hmm. And so if they already have metrics, KPIs that are helping them to do the things that they want to do, then we start there. And then we focus on metrics specific to my program. But I want to say a little bit about their current metrics. So one thing I find with clients is they've read a lot of articles, they've hired people who have had a lot of experience with dashboards and different software, and we have to have the certain metrics that tell us certain things. But like all the other things that we've known about leadership and teams and organizations, it's all in the execution. So I am implementing metrics, and I'm a whiz on dashboards. So now we've set up a new dashboard. We give everybody access to it. We've trained them on how to use it, but they don't have a metric around their metrics. Mm-hmm. They're not checking with each other clearly in an urgent enough way to say, let's not keep doing this if it's not working. They have metrics that aren't telling them what they need to know. They have metrics that were for a report that was 3 years ago. We don't even use that report anymore. We don't need that mm-hmm. metric. And they have so many metrics that they couldn't possibly get a sense for. When a leader says, here are my priorities, here are my goals, this is what we should be working on now, there are too many metrics for them to know how it's going. So one of the first things we do is approach their current metrics and KPIs, measurement platform. So how are they doing it? And we're talking about the top team. We're talking about leadership teams. So they have influence over these decisions. So we want to get the group to become one mind and one voice on which metrics. And that is one of the pillars of this program that most clients that I work with, they're not one mind. They're not one voice. Their teams are rowing in different directions. They're coming to the leader to solve problems because they're not problem solving together because they don't have that kind of partnership with each other. So we grow. That is the most important, and it's the thing we spend the earliest mm-hmm. time on, is becoming that team. So once you become a team that has you can speak for each other and you know what each other's teams are doing and your teams are rowing in the same direction as the goals and the priorities of the leader. Once you have that, I could run a list of 20 issues that we have right now that are all about disruption and turmoil in what has happened in our world and even just the last 5 years. And without that cohesiveness, without that togetherness, that trust and that collaboration, those problems aren't being solved, not because they're too big, but because you're missing on the creativity and the genius and the super powers of the group you have, because they're not getting along, they're not cohesive, and they're going off in different directions. So how you view your KPIs and your metrics, your measures, you want to be of one mind around that. And then you want to pick 5 or 8. You want to know at any given point, do I have the same view as my other 3 colleagues on this team about what's happening in our company? And do we have the 5 to 8 metrics that tell us that and they're on our radar over and over again? So that's one of the first things that we do in this process, is look at how you know how things are going. Because a high-performing team always knows what the goal is mm-hmm. and what are the current priorities and who's supposed to do what and how's it going. That becomes second nature. That just becomes, we each have that, and you have ways to remember it, and you have high-performing meetings where you're going after it. And then when we, along the way, as we're introducing these building blocks and we are learning some things about how to behave and what are the most important ways to be a cohesive team, we start to introduce behavior metrics. So I can bet without a lot of risk that any of my clients who are having issues with their meetings, and they all are, dismal track record with meetings, they are not measuring how that's going. So one of the easiest changes you could make right now in a company, which would put you at the greatest strategic advantage, is to fix the thing that you spend a lot of time on, and it's costing your company billions of dollars in wasted time. People are frustrated or whatever. One of the ways so first of all, you need to understand what are the principles of a high performing meeting. So we take care of that right away. That is not rocket science, and that has been out for a long time. That is long standing information with the data to back it up. We just keep reinforcing it. When I was in my dissertation topic on teams, we talked about virtual teams. This is before there were a lot of virtual teams, and virtual teams had the same metrics of success as in-person teams because they went after it. They did what they needed to do to be a high-performing team. So we know what we need to know about high-performing meetings. If you're not having high-performing meetings, I can say it's because you don't have the knowledge of what it takes to have a high-performing meeting, and then you're not checking if you're following it. So I know a lot of companies have tried many things. So when I come in to work with a client, they've had consultants come through, they've had trainings on leadership, on teams, on high performance. They have whole programs that they've grown through HR, or they've hired people from the outside to come in with expertise. But it doesn't stick for a variety of reasons. And one of them is they haven't identified what the behavior changes should be, and then they're checking how they're going. So let us say that I am growing cohesion. So I'm a leader, and I'm going to go through the teamwork pillar, and I'm going to develop a cohesive, trusting, collaborative, high-performing team. We're not going to start with that. We're going to start in incremental steps, sequencing, because nobody starts trusting. It doesn't start that way. So what do we need to do? We ground ourselves in what's going on with the organization and what the goals are and whatever. And then we start identifying the behaviors that are the ones. So I have a few that are standard, which is, so if I'm working with a leadership team, we are going to make agreements. We are not going to talk about this group outside of this group. We are not going to go to our teams and talk about this group. We are not going to complain to somebody else. We're going to come to each other to solve. So there's a few of those kinds of agreements that we will make. Then, depending on the industry, the size of the team, the level in the organization, the work that they're doing, I'm going to, and some observations and some initial working together, I'm going to invite them to tell us what one or two other behaviors should we be looking at. And then we're going to say, now, how are we going to know how this is going? So we talk about the dance floor. So 95% of the work we do is on the dance floor. We're dancing. We're learning dancing. We're practicing it. We're changing the music. We're changing partners. We're learning the dancing. And then along the coaching journey and through this process of doing the things in sequence, we pause sometimes and we go up to the balcony. So we're no longer the team that's dancing. We are the team that's observing ourselves. So this is a part of that increase in emotional intelligence, in self-awareness, in team awareness, is we start to be our own observer. Mm-hmm. And when we're an observer, and I do it in a way that people feel comfortable. This is not a judgment thing. People didn't wake up every day to say, I want to come in and not be a high-performing team. I really want to have terrible meetings. Nobody does that. They're missing knowledge. They're missing coaching. They're missing practice. They're missing observation. They're missing feedback. So we're going to go up to the balcony, and we're going to give ourselves what's working. What did you just know? And so sometimes we go up to the balcony after something, mm-hmm. and then we can just do a little bit of analysis, do a little retrospective on what just happened. Or maybe we come together and we talk about something that happened yesterday, last week, last month. Sometimes, and we learn how to do this in a way that feels okay, we agree on, sometimes we actually take a pause in the middle of the work. Mm-hmm. And we say, I think we should go up to the balcony. So we'll go up to the balcony, and then we'll start talking about, whoa, what was that? And maybe we start with a little piece of paper, your device, and you write, everybody takes a few minutes so that the extroverts don't do the talking first, and just jot down a few ideas. What's working well? What did you notice? What do you think could have been improved, and what might we do next? And then we go around, and after a few of those, and especially trust starts to develop when we do a few of those or many of those, and nobody's head explodes and nobody gets fired and nobody falls apart. And the team actually gets better and does a lot more fun outcomes. They start to notice that they're actually doing better, and it starts to be motivating. So when we're up in the balcony and we're noticing things, we're observing, we are talking about behaviors, after a while, we're going to start choosing 1, 2, or 3 behaviors that are the ones that are the latest, most important. And someone's going to find out. And so these aren't secrets. Leaders are going to start talking openly about behavior. And that on the short list, if I had to give you a short list of what's missing, why organizations struggle with their teams and their leadership, it's because they're not talking openly about behaviors. There's no place for it. Their leaders didn't do it. The teams didn't do it. If they do it, they get punished. There's some sort of a price, or they don't have practice, so they don't even know how to do it. Yeah. So the high-performing team, talks to each other about what's working and what is needed, including behavior.
It would seem to me that there's certainly a level of self-awareness, team awareness, but perhaps this idea of trust is something that in a lot of situations is acknowledged, but not necessarily addressed. And when you're trying to bring a team together to operate on the same page, how do we open the kimono and address all the issues that have perhaps been collecting over time and ensure that there is actual trust within the team?
So this is also information that we've had for years. The way to build trust is to start with the why and the what, and get really clear on the goals and the roles. Trust sometimes comes inherent in the process. So you put in place your systems and you develop your processes, because you don't go after trust. You don't have an offsite to work on trust. You set some parameters. So if you talk about me to your team, I will not trust you. Yeah. And if we make some agreements, let's say we make 6 team agreements and we revisit them and we remind ourselves about them, and eventually we can recite them in our sleep. And if someone breaks one of those agreements, we're not going to be able to build trust. Now, you get to be human, so it doesn't go well right away. But it's this balance of don't take big leaps and big risks initially that require more trust than you've already developed. Start with where you are. And so I worked with a medical device company. They brought me in because they'd had a global leadership team that was gaining no traction. They were spending hundreds of $1,000s on travel and staff time, and they weren't getting anywhere. And they were confounded. What is happening with this team? So I did my coaching research and talked with people and understood what the purpose of why they brought me in, but where are they headed and what do they want to do and where are they going? And then we created I built a 3-day offsite. And with very specific activities, which in my mind, and I was pretty open about what the outcomes were, but in my mind, the outcomes of these activities are to help them begin to develop as a group. You're not going to trust each other until you know each other and you know each other's work and you believe that that person is as invested in the agreements you've made as I am. I'm going to do this work and I'm not going to gossip. Are you? I'm not going to trust you until I know you're also all in. And then when we're doing the actual work, we come together. Now we have high performing team meetings. And in those high performing team meetings, we have freed up precious energy and time for fires that you no longer have to put out. You don't have the same ones over and over again. You've got the right people in the meeting and you're taking time together. Now you develop the ability to lean in more and become more connected to each other around the work. And each of those leadership team members leads their own team. So they're all in the same boat. Most of the time, they're in the same boat. And then the leader of that team is in that boat. They have a team. It happens to be this team. Once you start building alliances and the leadership team members become each of their own cadre, their teachers, their support system, their mentors, their colleagues, instead of going and talking to your team about the issues, they're coming to each of you. And once you start doing that, there's a level of vulnerability that starts to become more okay. That you're being more vulnerable without having to work on it. You're naturally coming together. And what happened with this medical device global leadership team is we worked through all of that, and pretty soon they had gelled for the first time in 9 months. And once they gelled, they completely rewrote the next day and a half of the conference, which I was thrilled by, because they made it their own. And at this point, they each had members of their teams who were asking to get off the project. 9 months, no traction, gossiping, complaining, not a leadership team together. Everybody's frustrated, doing all this travel, doing all this global, having to virtual meetings that they weren't accustomed to, and nobody was getting anywhere. And as soon as they made it their own and pulled it together and immediately began to feel like they were going in the same direction, people started asking to be on the team rather than leaving the team. They immediately started to get results. For the first time, people were crying, people were laughing. They learned the value of leading as a group and not feeling like it's good news. These people that are gossiping to their own teams or complaining or coming to the leader all the time, they're feeling alone. They are feeling like an island. They don't know what to do. They don't know. People aren't following the goals and the priorities. Their teams are rowing in different directions. I love Lencioni said, so Patrick Lencioni, the 5 dysfunctions of a team, said a long time ago, and it's still current, if you can get all your organizational members to row in the same direction, you can dominate any industry, any market. And the reason he can say that is all of the thousands of teams that he's had firsthand knowledge of, organizations aren't doing that. That is number one competitive advantage, is be a cohesive leadership team leading in sync, in rowing in the same direction. And then that self-satisfaction that we talked about, that's individual and inherent, each of the team members start to feel that. Team members, like adults in a household where there are kids, team members don't like it when a leadership team is not together. It doesn't feel good to them. They may like being on the inside of a little bit of gossip or whatever, but they'd actually rather feel like they were in good hands. This is a safe space for me to know what I need to do my part of our goals, be able to be honest and say what I need to do that, and then information about how I'm doing. If I don't feel like the leadership team is in sync and trusts each other and is working together, it is really difficult for me. And imagine the complexity of organizations, multiply that by hundreds and thousands. And so the trust is a beautiful byproduct. And it's built in. This is all intentional. You can't do it without trust, which is why the building blocks go in the order that they go in. But again, some of this we've known for decades. You can't start up here. You can't start with really great metrics and holding everybody accountable if you haven't even identified who you are and they know where they fit, and you've done enough work together as a team to collaborate and trust, which then affects waves going out into the entire organization.
So, could you walk us through the pillars of Top Team Accelerator?
So Top Team Accelerator is 4 pillars. And the first one is teamwork. Teamwork is all of that first things first. Who are we? What industry are we in? What work are we doing? And who's at the table? So what is my role? What's my background? What can you count on me for? And then we start the process of emotional intelligence, self-awareness. Let's do some assessments and find out where we're at with how much I'm aware when I speak what impact that has. What are my behaviors, that kind of thing. So all that gets covered in teamwork. And then the other thing that we do, one of the first things we do is Lencioni has introduced his Working Genius, which has been my favorite assessment to come down the line for a long time. So I do this with every one of the teams that I work with. Working Genius is the acronym widget, and it's the sequence of how something comes to fruition. And it's changed whole organizations, whole teams in record time. So we do that right away. And then we use that language and we use those learnings to become more of a team. And then we have a common language. We have a common approach for how we plan things and how we run our meetings and how we hire people and how we onboard them and how we retain them. And all of that happens in the first one. So that's teamwork. And then the second pillar is called commitment. And that is where individuals, so now you've built the team that is starting to coalesce. But if that's all they did, that wouldn't be enough. We would go back to all of our old ways, because it has to be based on the work. It has to be based on what you're doing every day. It's not enough to feel like you're cohesive. You have to be cohesive around the work. And that requires clarity and alignment. So each person on that leadership team needs to have the same view of what the leader's goals are. And they can't be 12 goals. They have to be a few. And what are the priorities? What should we be working on now compared to a year from now? And so imagine a leadership team when organizations have everybody off rowing in different directions. It's because they don't have clarity. They're not telling the same story. And alignment is agreeing. So maybe I'm clear with you. We're clear. I just don't like it. Or I don't agree with it. Or that's not why you hired me. Or my team is doing this other thing. That's not the new, latest, greatest, sexiest or project going on in the company. We're going to be off over here doing this. And so clarity is being really clear. Everyone, who's who, what work is to be done, on what schedule, what's the plan, who are the roles? What are the individual teams of these leaders supposed to be doing? And is the leadership team of one mind? Now, alignment, agreement doesn't mean I love it. This is the decision-making processes, and we learn as a part of this program how to advocate for your space because we hired you for that, and then how to make decisions and what is your governance so that when are the decisions really top down and when are they the group makes them and when are they you have your teams make them. So all of that happens during that commitment pillar because now the team is committing to being a high performing team together and running the organization that way. And then comes accountability. So once you've built trust and you've developed some collaboration and you now are clear together and you are in agreement or in alignment, even if it's not going the way I go, I trust this team and I know we'll try some things and we'll fail fast and we'll try some other things. Once you have that in place, now we can start to not just have the leader hold each of us accountable, and we're learning how to hold our teams accountable, we can hold each other accountable. And that's not a pipe dream. You can read about that in an article. You can, try this or buy this product or whatever. No, this is a real thing, but you can imagine that we've been describing the foundation that you have to put in place so that it's safe, so that you have habits that are healthy, so that you know what's coming. You're not throwing somebody something out of the blue and then holding them accountable about it. You have developed the kind of transparency and decisions, and it's not this. We're not doing these things. We're doing these things. Once you have all that and people know who's doing what, then you can start to hold each other accountable in a way that feels okay. Oh, I thought you were going to have that done by this meeting. Oh, do you need something? What? Okay. And then once you get to, and this can happen before this, by the way, as you're going through these processes where you're starting to be a lot more honest with each other and you are really distilling down to the most important conversations to focus on the most important priorities so you can put out the most important fires and start to grow some things, not putting in fires all of the time, you're going to start being able to solve some of those challenges that have been in your way. And we can talk little ones that maybe come up in your industry, or you've got some nagging ones. We can talk big ones like supply chain and the workforce challenges and disruption and turmoil. What has happened in the last several years and how has that impacted workplaces? And what are we going to do about that? And everybody says those problems are too hard to solve. And I say, actually, it's hard to solve when you don't have time to do that. When you haven't learned together how to be a well-oiled, high-performing team so that each of our creativity and our superpowers and our working genius start to become in the mix. And all of a sudden, you have exponentially elevated your ability to create and to problem solve. So in the accountability phase, now you're looking around to your organization and you're saying, okay, what are the operations we have? What are the processes that we have? What systems do we have in place, and do they fit the goals? Do they fit those priorities? If you haven't been able to fix your meetings, you have a lot of other great things you can accomplish, because those same reasons for not fixing your meetings are also keeping you from having better operations. So in the accountability phase, we pull together as a leadership team and we look at the operations to make sure, not all of them, but the ones that are the most important, to make sure that they are supporting who you are today, this team that you have developed, and then you have it, and you're going to make changes as you go. So one of the changes you'll make with your meetings is you separate out the type of meeting. You should not be talking in a day-to-day meeting or even a weekly tactical meeting. Someone should not bring up a strategic problem, a big problem or a strategic opportunity. Somebody, and you get to be able to hold each other accountable after a while. If you're running the meeting the way you need to, somebody who brings up a strategy piece, someone else is going to say, oh, that doesn't fit this meeting. This is a tactical meeting. Let's table that. Let's bring that up at the future meeting. And then there are meetings that are strategic only. So if somebody brings up a tactical piece, we don't talk about that here. Let's table that and let's move that into the tactical meeting. So then you start to develop topics for your strategic conversations that are away from work. People's phones are off. They're truly not putting out fires. And now you have time to deep dive into one or two. You take several hours to deep dive into one or two topics that are those opportunities or those challenges that have felt too overwhelming. Now you have the time and you're holding each other accountable and yourselves accountable, which means you can have real conversations. You can be honest. I don't like that, or I'm not comfortable with that, or I actually don't know anything about that. Tell me more. The conversations start to sound like that. And in my program, I'm in the room for some of those conversations. I've done a lot of observation, and we've done workshops and offsites and practice. And so then I'm there, and then I'm not always there. And then people are being able to help each other. So that's the third pillar, is accountability. And then the final one is performance. So once we go through the learning process, get through several months of how to be a cohesive team in the teamwork pillar, and then clarity and alignment in the commitment pillar, and then setting up our operations and making sure that our teams and their teams have high performing meetings. We do working genius with all of their teams, the leadership teams. And now we shift to performance. And that's the fourth and final pillar. And that is, okay, how are we going to help these changes stick? And we haven't talked about habits yet, but one of the hallmarks of this program that I learned a lot along the way is that it is not about desire or discipline necessarily, or people just don't want to work, or people just don't want. It's all about habits. And once I really learned that, when I heard James Clear say, we do not rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our habits. I immediately listened to many of his podcast interviews, bought his books, learned about that. And the reason it was so helpful for me is because it fit what I already thought for years, which was, I don't think people are doing it intentionally. What's really going on here? And so I say, if culture eats strategy for breakfast, actually your habits are eating your goals. They're eating your strategy. They're eating your desires and your aspirations. So from the very beginning in teamwork, and then into commitment, and then accountability, and then in performance through the entire program, we are looking at what habits do we have in place, and let's change them. And there's methodical ways to do that are sequenced, and it can be painless because we don't start out with the end in mind and doing it differently tomorrow. We work with the brain the same way a dance coach would work with a dancer, the way a sports coach works. You don't start out a marathon when you haven't run around the block. But habits, the good news is they're actually quite doable to change when you follow the processes that work for that and you go with what the brain is doing. And the reason why habits are so important is the brain is hardwired to keep you alive and manage risk and opportunity. And so almost every part of the brain wants things to be familiar. It would just rather things be familiar. It would rather we just follow those well-worn pathways and do things the old way. If I had to get up every morning and relearn how to get a drink of water, how to cook breakfast, how to get out the door, I'd never get out of bed because I'd have to relearn it every single day. No, what I've done is develop the habits. And so then when I want to become someone who goes to the gym, I have to interrupt that morning routine, and it won't happen on the first day, which is why we have all of this knowledge that we transfer and decisions and open conversations that we make and metrics around behaviors. And then we talk about it openly. Which habits are sticking and which habits do we still need to address? And what happens after a short amount of time is people really love the feelings they have when they're starting to do things differently. They've been wanting to. They hired consultants. They did training. They hired people to come in and to take over. They let go of people that they thought were the problem. And now they're finally seeing, I just didn't know the plan. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't realize my habits were so important. It's not very sexy. Doesn't sound very rocket sciencey, but we're hardwired for the familiar, and we have to fight that. Not fight it, plan for it. And so one of the other fun things about working with clients is when I start to work with them, they tend to tell me, oh, this person's a problem or that person's on a performance plan. I don't know how long they're going to last. Once we start putting these building blocks in place, we put the systems in place, the processes, we work through these pillars of the program, all of a sudden someone who looks like a low performer, they're actually a high performer. And sometimes someone deemed a high performer, we find out that there's some things going on there that need to be addressed. But it feels good to everyone to feel like they are finally have a systematic approach to what they need to do at work, which you hire for finance, you hire for supply chain, you hire for all the different aspects of HR, and then someone along the way, I learned that this had to do with the military years and years ago, decades ago. We started calling the things that people do with each other in the workplace as soft skills. And so finance, accounting, all of that, hard skills. So along the way, which was never intended when the phrase was coined, soft skills, it started to sound like it didn't have the same value as maybe a hard skill. So you don't necessarily hire people who are geniuses at those very strategic skills. I've heard it be called that now, strategic skills. But therein also is your strategic advantage. When we really know how to talk to each other and how to show up with my role and the role of my team and the roles of this team, and we know how to change a habit if we need to or want to, we know how to have a high-performing meeting, we know how to turn on a dime, we know how to fail really fast and have a huge disruption or a major opportunity come on our path, and we know how to pivot because we're so good at it, that starts to feel really good, and it starts to become something that people want to recreate. And then they can build longer term into their plan to be able to keep meeting this way and keep talking this way and keep leading this way and keep leading their own teams this way and keep holding each other accountable this way going forward.
That's very insightful. I'm curious, you've addressed a lot of the team dynamics and the trust and the collaboration, etc. I know you've talked about self-awareness, but is there an element of understanding people's motivations and their desire to grow in certain areas that also needs to be addressed on a continual basis?
So some of the things I learned in therapy were about the danger of being inside someone's head, trafficking in their motivations, trafficking in their agendas. I haven't found it to be very helpful because I'm probably going to get it wrong, or I don't know my motivations and desires, and it might be obvious to you, but if you tell me what they are, I'm still not going to know because I won't believe you. What I found that's really helpful is once we start to go through these assessments and we talk about what's really important, we're actually giving people a recipe for a different way to come to work and a different way to be a part of this leadership team. So you had ingredients. There's a few that you're going to keep. There's some you're going to completely throw out, and there's some we're going to wait and see if they're needed. But we're going to add ingredients that you haven't been using because someone didn't prioritize it or value it or whatever. And then you're going to learn the ways to change some of these habits, and you're going to practice, and you're going to develop some trust and some collaboration, and you're going to start to support each other, and you're going to start to have under your belt some successes, small, medium, and large. At that point, as you're getting even more and more to be more and more of a cohesive team, I think motivation and desires and agendas can be talked about very easily, openly. I will say the leader is the number one leader in this process. So the leader has to feel comfortable actually leading the process. So we make sure of that. And they wouldn't have to require someone to have a certain motivation, like parenting. If you think you have to get your teenager to have a different motivation, that is not the place to put your time and effort. The place to put your time and effort is in clarity. Here's what I'm looking for. Here's what your part is. Here's what I'm going to make sure you have so that you can do it. Here's how we're going to know how it's going. And now, here's how it's going. Once those pieces come into place, and then you get a little farther down the road and you've had several of those in several different ways, and the ways that you lead your team or whatever, it's going to start to surface what people's motivations and desires and agendas are, because they're not going to be able to hide them. And then now that you've got meetings that are separating the tactical from the strategic, you can have a strategic topic and spend 2 hours talking about there's something missing here. It feels like we've got an issue with, let's say, motivation. Maybe it's somebody's team. You're probably not necessarily going to look at it for yourself. And so behaviors are a great topic for a 1 or 2 hour strategy session once a month. These are the things nobody's been talking about up to now. And then once a year or twice that you're going off site, you can take some time to talk about this. But I find that when we're really clear and with what is needed and how it's going, people naturally develop different motivations, and we're paying them. The leader is paying them. They're here to do a job. We are not here to make it different so that they want to do it. It's not like that. It is, I'm the leader, and here's my goals, and here's my priorities. I need the right people on the team to make that happen. Now, let's see where we're at with that and what we need to do. And then once you're in it and you feel like you have a handle on it and the team is starting to build these successes, then you look at who's on the team and how it's going. But I try to not mind read. And I also really want to make it comfortable to talk out loud about, I'm not motivated around this. This is not what I did in college. It's wonderful. And teams do get there. It's wonderful when you can start to talk to each other in informal, honest ways without the drama, without the severity. It becomes more natural to just be open. Okay, so now what are we going to do? Let's turn this into action.
Brilliant.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see how it also addresses issues like customer experience, or at least the internal experience in an organization, building empathy in order to further those experiences, etc. I love what you're talking about there. Is there perhaps an aspect or two that doesn't get talked about very much in terms of building these high-performance teams? If so, what would they be?
I've been doing this for a while, coaching 20 years, and I've been in organizations for a long time. But the mistakes that I made earlier were to think that the process was going to solve some of the problems that it's not designed for. So you have leaders who are saying, I didn't know I was going to have to be a babysitter. And they're not saying it out loud on the golf course, because they'll say it to a coach behind closed doors or when nobody else is able to hear. They liken it to preschool teacher. Babysitting. Who are these people? I hired these amazing, talented folks, and they fight. They gossip. They come to me to solve all their problems. They don't work together. Actually, they don't even work at all. They go and lead their own teams. Their teams don't know each other. They don't talk to each other about their teams. And so the leader is confiding in me. They're not even liking it. They wanted to be promoted. They wanted to lead a company. They wanted to lead a big division. They wanted to impact the work. They wanted to do something great in this particular industry or market. They wanted to make that exponential 50,000 people in the communities, their lives better because they're leading it. And that is not what it feels like. And they can't talk about that because that doesn't sound good. If they're a publicly traded company, that's not something you want to hear. If you're being interviewed, that's not something you want to hear. You don't want, like with parents, you don't want your kids to know that it's really uncomfortable, how it's going. And so they don't talk about it, or they maybe talk a little bit behind closed doors, but a lot of it they keep in, and that actually impacts their quality of life in big ways. And we hear this from clients all the time. So what I like to do when I work with them directly is we start there. We always start there. What are all your challenges? And then we, over the course of weeks and months, we start to check them off the list. And the goal is if a leader gets interviewed for an article after they've been doing this for a while, they're not trying to bite their tongue and not talk about how they feel like a babysitter. They're not trying to cover up that their teams, these brilliant people that they hired, act like they're not even nice to each other. Rather than having to bite their tongue and keep all that a secret, they can talk openly about the great work that they're doing. They can talk openly about a failure they just had. They did it really quickly. They tried it, egg on their face. It was a disaster. They're such a well-oiled machine that they were able to pivot very quickly, and now they're focusing on something else. And the other thing is they don't talk about vulnerability. We use this word now, so it's at least an acceptable word. Thank goodness. That was a long time coming. Leaders don't get asked. They're not promoted because they spend all day talking about their vulnerability. But the truth is, every single person on the planet, every animal, there's vulnerability in everything we do. There's the positives, there's the negatives, there's the opportunities, and there's the threats. And I don't like to create buzzwords so people start to roll their eyes. Oh, she's talking about vulnerability again. So we don't go after it at vulnerability. We talk about what's really important, to be honest and to be clear, so we are putting these systems and processes in place so that we accomplish A, B, C, D, and E. It's the eyes on the prize that motivates people and moves them along. And once there's some coaching and some practice, I can start to talk about things that might have seemed too vulnerable before. And the leader is now recognizing the value, the strategic value to addressing one of their blind spots. So I'll talk to a team and the team will say, our leader doesn't hold anybody accountable for anything. And if I ask the leader to say, oh, I'm really good at holding my team accountable. And I'm talking people that you would recognize the name of their company. You would recognize the high level that they are in the organization and the great work that they've done. And they have a very different view of the leader's abilities, of their behaviors. And so those blind spots, the things that nobody can tell them because of the situation, yep. This is a benefit for coaching. And these are the unspoken things that we address without having to shine the light on them too brightly, but let it be a part of the methodology, and stuff bubbles up naturally. And then over the course of time, if we get to something stubborn, like maybe the leader is the problem, or maybe they have one leader that they don't hold accountable and this isn't working, and then we can talk about what do you want to do about it. But then they have the energy and the wherewithal to focus on that deep challenge because they've finally solved other ones and they like their meetings and they're spending less time on that. They actually get to spend more time each day doing some of the things they thought they would do as a leader, and they could talk about them openly.
Right. To wrap things up, Margie, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
If I listen to this episode, a top takeaway, I hope that people take away that it's possible. We've known everything we know about this, how to do this. The reason we're not doing it is a few things. Our habits, our training was in our families and in organizations, and they didn't know how to do that. So I learned how not to do it, and I'm doing it because it's natural. It becomes my habits. I'm not even thinking about it. It is autopilot every day when I lead. And I didn't know that I could learn a different way. The knowledge is there. It does take time. It takes an investment. It takes the awkwardness of being open with each other and doing that for the first time, but it is possible. And you want to hold the consultants, the coaches that you have accountable, because that information is out there, and then it's all about implementation.
And if listeners are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
So you can follow me on LinkedIn. Olsen is Oleson. So there's this quiet little E in there that's silent, but it's spelled Oleson, Oleson, Margie Olsen. And then Olsen Consulting is Olsen, Oleson-consulting.com. You can download my case study and get information there. You can see videos and find out what the program really looks like, look at resources for articles about meetings and some of the other information. It's all out there on the website.
Brilliant. We'll include links to that. Margie, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. It was so nice to talk to you.